In the first 6 to 12 months of a war with the United States and Great Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. One of my favorite little tidbits from the history of the world. You're muted. Why are you muted? Unmute you. Guest. Oh, bother. Fix that. We'll come right
Well, now I
back.
got to reset the damn prompter. Talk to the people for a minute.
All right, I got you, bro. You get that straight. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius, where the technical issues are part of the show. So if you're just joining us, we've just had an action-packed break into today's story. The microphone is muted. I don't know what else we're going to do about it, but as soon as he gets this thing run out, we're going to do the opening intro, which is exactly what we usually do at the beginning of the show. You got it yet?
Yep.
All right, do the thing. And 1, 2, 3.
From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I always thought mistletoe was the male version of camel toe. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Delighted to have you with us tonight. Coming up on the Worst People in the Whole Wide World Weekly Update, Sydney Sweeney says she is very sorry for pissing off the woke rage mob. John Cena says he's very sorry for kissing the ass of communist China. The British government cancels elections and eliminates jury trials and still calls itself a democracy. But first, since it's the 7th of December and we are here to talk about the worst people in the world, we might as well open with the Imperial Japanese Navy. It is the 84th anniversary of Pearl Harbor today, and if I'm not too much mistaken, it is the first Pearl Harbor Day on which none of the survivors remain alive, which means the event has officially passed out of living memory, and the duty now falls to all of us to make sure it doesn't pass out of the cultural memory and the popular consciousness. There are some people, assholes I believe they're called, who say we shouldn't talk about Pearl Harbor anymore, that we should no longer commemorate the 7th of December each year, and for those people I have 5 words. You can go get fucked. because we're going to keep the memory of Pearl Harbor alive, and we are going to continue talking about the events of that day. We are going to continue holding the 7th of December as a date worthy of our collective remembrance. We're going to continue visiting the USS Arizona Memorial in our 1.7 million per year, and there is nothing any of you whiny little dickheads can do about it. Now, there's one school of thought that says the Imperial Japanese Navy weren't actually some of the worst people in the world, and that technically Pearl Harbor was not an unprovoked sneak attack by Japan upon a country with which Japan was not at war. The reason that school of thought exists is because it was the intention of the Japanese government to have the message containing their declaration of war delivered and received in Washington about 30 minutes before the bombs and the torpedoes began falling in Hawaii. But in the actual event, that never happened. The transmission was transmitted and received later than intended, and since it was a Sunday morning, it took a bit of additional time for the War Department to locate a Japanese-speaking translator who was capable of interpreting the contents of the message, which meant, as a practical matter, the declaration of war was received and understood only several hours after the news was received that the Japanese aircraft were attacking our Pacific Fleet in its home port. So yes, it very much was a sneak attack upon a non-combatant nation. And this might all seem like a but it's not a trifling matter, and nobody understood that reality better than Admiral Yamamoto himself, who understood the character of the American people far better than his colleagues in the Japanese Admiralty did, having lived here for many years and traveled extensively throughout the United States. Admiral Yamamoto knew full well that even if the declaration had been delivered and translated before the initiation of hostilities, as was intended, that the Pearl Harbor attack would be seen by the American people as a dastardly and underhanded act, and that our righteous fury would be commensurate with that reality. The last thing Japan wanted was to fight a full-on war of annihilation against the United States. The point of the Pearl Harbor attack was to strike a sufficiently heavy blow that it would take our Navy at least 6 months to recover from it, during which time Japan would have a free hand to grab all the Pacific territories they wanted to grab and to consolidate their gains, and hopefully at that point the Americans would then opt to sue for peace. But Yamamoto knew that declaring war on the morning of the attack would eliminate any possibility of the Americans being amenable to any peaceful settlement, if indeed any such possibility existed at all, which it almost certainly did not. Yamamoto never actually uttered the famous apocryphal quote that is often attributed to him, "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve," but his private thoughts probably weren't too far off from that, and moreover, he didn't entirely disagree with our assessment of the moral calumny of the act the Japanese had undertaken. He thought it was a rather shameful thing to be attacking an adversary that hadn't been advised of your hostile intent, or was advised with only 30 minutes to spare and didn't have a fair chance to defend himself. He didn't think that was a very honorable way to be waging war, and he wasn't wrong. But alas, he was just the commander of the task force and the architect of the operation, and the diplomatic decisions were being made well above his pay grade. And aside from all that, for as much as the Pearl Harbor attack was a brilliant and history-making tactical achievement, it was a strategic blunder of the highest degree. For as much as it was a triumph of intelligence gathering, it was also a failure of intelligence gathering. And let's quickly take a moment to deal with some of the other worst people in the whole wide world, those being the unscrupulous conspiracy cranks who have spent the last 84 years trying to sell books and get themselves rich by spinning fanciful bullshit theories about how President Franklin Roosevelt or somebody else in the American government or military had specific foreknowledge of the Pearl Harbor operation and chose to let it happen. If there is any aspect of December 7th that doesn't warrant any further attention or discussion by anyone, it is that one. Were there tactical and intelligence failures on the American side that resulted in the attack being more successful and more devastating than it might otherwise have been? Well, of course there were. War is like that sometimes. But a series of blunders does not foreknowledge make. Did Roosevelt want us to get into the war? Of course he did. But it was the European war that he wanted to get us into. He didn't really care about what was going on in the Far East, as long as Japan didn't directly attack us or any of our territories. Japan started annexing various parts of China as early as 1937, and China was our ally. But we didn't care enough to stop selling crude oil to the Japanese. We didn't care enough to start a Lend-Lease agreement with China like the one that we had with the British. All we did for China was to allow some civilian fighter pilots to go over there and help out their Air Force. Here's looking at you, Pappy Boyington. As long as they didn't attack Hawaii or the Philippines, Roosevelt would have been more than happy to let Japan do pretty much anything it wanted. We weren't about to proactively go to war over some British or Dutch or French possessions. In the actual event, Hitler gave Roosevelt exactly what he wanted when he declared war on us for reasons that remain not entirely clear. On the 8th of December, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, he didn't have any treaty obligations with Japan that required him to do that. He just did it, apparently out of sheer hubris and stupidity. And even though Japan had directly attacked us and Germany hadn't, what strategic plan did we decide on? We decided to focus on defeating Germany first and Japan second. Would we have done that if we were so desperate for war with Japan that we intentionally let them attack us and kill thousands of our men? No, we would not. And that's why every Pearl Harbor foreknowledge conspiracy theory is sheer idiocy that warrants no serious rebuttal from any serious person. In the event, though, Japan did attack Hawaii, and they attacked the Philippines immediately afterward. The reason we were caught so off guard by the Pearl Harbor operation had to do more than anything else with the fact that very few people thought it was possible to send an entire carrier task group 4,000 miles across the North Pacific totally undetected and launch a successful air attack upon the Hawaiian Islands. And I know what the standard counterpoint is to this. I know some of you are thinking it right now. You're thinking, wait a second, but the British staged a successful carrier-based attack on the Italian fleet in their home port of Taranto in November 1940, a year before Pearl Harbor. Well, what's the difference between the two? The difference is that the Mediterranean is a hell of a lot smaller than the Pacific, and going 500 miles undetected is way different than going 4,000. That British carrier group was able to conduct that whole operation on one load of fuel. The Japanese carrier group, on the other hand, in addition to the cruisers and the destroyers that you need to bring with you for defensive screening, you also have to bring a whole shitload of oil tankers in order to keep all of those vessels fueled while you were traversing the entire goddamn Pacific Ocean there and back. And this is one of the big reasons why the U.S. naval leadership thought, incorrectly as it turns out, there is no way that they can sail a fleet that big that far without us detecting it. It was also widely believed that it's impracticable to attack ships with torpedoes in a shallow water port, even though the English had already solved that problem at Taranto with an innovation that the Japanese often falsely receive credit for. We will just swap out the metal fins on the torpedoes for wooden fins, increase the buoyancy a little bit, they won't sink as far when they hit the water. Problem solved. And we were aware of that innovation. We knew the Japanese were aware of it. But frankly, we were reticent to give the Japanese Navy the amount of credit that it turns out they deserved. And what's more, it was widely believed by most of our intelligence experts that if there was going to be a Japanese sneak attack, it would take the form of a sabotage operation rather than airplanes dropping bombs and torpedoes. It's easy, in retrospect, to say that was a stupid assessment and we didn't have our eye on the ball. Of course, it's easy to say that. But the next military force that focuses its energies on guarding against attacks that are only possible in theory, rather than attacks that are proven to be real possibilities in the real world, will be the first one. On the Japanese side, their intelligence and espionage services did a great job up to a point. They developed really solid information regarding the layout of the harbor, what kind of ships were docked in which places. They built a full-size mock-up of the place to practice their bombing and torpedo runs. But they also shit the bed in a couple of areas that could have made the Pearl Harbor operation a much heavier blow than it wound up being. First, they didn't have up-to-the-minute intelligence on whether our aircraft carriers were in port on the morning of the attack. As it turns out, they were not. And this is what makes Pearl Harbor as much of a strategic blunder as it was a tactical triumph, because all of the ships they sunk and heavily damaged were First World War-era dreadnought battleships that wouldn't have played a very big part in the war anyway. The very fact that you can use carrier-based aircraft to inflict heavy damage on an enemy fleet in its home port is conclusive evidence by itself that battleships and their big guns are no longer relevant in naval combat. In other words, the fact that you can sink a battleship in that manner proves that battleships no longer matter. And that was borne out during the 3.5 years of naval combat that followed in the Pacific Theater, when the total number of engagements in which Japanese and American battleships fired their guns at each other was 0. And granted, you can chalk that all up to blind luck, that our carriers happened to be out to sea on the day the Japanese decided to attack, but there is no easy explanation for why they didn't make any apparent effort to attack our oil tanks and our fuel depots, which, if they had successfully done so, it might have actually had the desired effect of knocking our fleet out of the game for 6 months or more, just like they wanted, even if they didn't sink or damage a single ship, because, spoiler alert, ships can't go to sea if you have reduced their fuel supply to a flaming ruin. And I feel like I've used up almost the whole monologue on the Pearl Harbor thing. So there's nothing wrong with that. But let's quickly get to the other things that I said we were going to get to. Sydney Sweeney apparently got so spooked by the response to that Blue Jeans ad a few months back. You remember when she made an innocent joke about having good genes, and then every obese purple-haired maniac on the whole interwebs declared that she is the bastard love child of Joseph Goebbels. Now she has decided that she doesn't want to be the one actress in Hollywood who laughs in the face of the woke rage mob. She wants to return to the loving embrace of being a member in good standing of the Identity Politics Club, where you're allowed to be a hot, big-titted blonde woman, but you have to pretend that you're ashamed of being a big-titted blonde woman. And that's too bad. We had one Hollywood actress who looked like she might be willing to go off the reservation and to thumb her nose at the forces of woke fascism, but she got cowed right back into conformity and self-loathing. Nevertheless, we wish her and her magnificent breasts the best of luck in their future endeavors. Meanwhile, John Cena, whose final wrestling match is coming up next Saturday night, says he regrets that ridiculous groveling Mandarin language apology video he made a few years back when he committed the grievous transgression of calling Taiwan a country. And then the Chi-Coms got very mad and yelled at him a lot, so he immediately made a "oh, me so sorry" hostage video, because God forbid we piss off the Chi-Coms. You know what a good way of avoiding that mistake in the future is, John? How about never apologize to freaking communists, just as a general rule of thumb? Do we care if the Chi-Coms get their knickers in a twist over the words we use to refer to Taiwan? No, we don't. And how do you say you can't see me in Mandarin? But I bet John Cena already knew that. And finally, it's time to check in with our very good friends across the pond in the jolly old Islamic Republic of Britannistan, where those principled guardians of democratic self-government, Sir Keir and the Stormtroopers, seem to be letting the mask slip just a little bit more each week. First, they postponed all of next year's local council elections until 2028, and they didn't really offer an official reason, because we all know what the real reason is, but they can't say that out loud. It's because their polling numbers are down the toilet. They know they're going to lose. They know they're going to lose badly, and the only way they can cling to power is by not letting the people vote. Next, they announced that they are abolishing jury trials for all but the most serious offenses, reversing a precedent that's existed since King John signed the goddamn Magna Carta in the year 1200. Why are they doing that? Well, because they can. Now, from here forward, some woke Labour Party apparatchik is going to be your sole judge, jury, and executioner, so best of luck, Mr. and Mrs. Britain. You know, if I didn't know better, I might almost conclude that a written constitution is more important than our British friends have ever been willing to concede. For my whole life, I've been listening to them say, "Oh, you silly Americans with your written charter and your Bill of Rights. We don't need such things in the United Kingdom, dear boy. We have got 1,000 years of precedent and tradition and common law on our side," which is all well and good, unless and until you wind up with a government that doesn't give a damn about any of that tradition and precedent and common law, and then you might find yourself desperately wishing that you had a written charter and a Bill of Rights, just like the silly Americans do. And speaking of England, if you came here looking for an Ashes update, I'm not ready to talk about it yet, except to say those dirty kangaroo fucking convicts have won again, and it wasn't close again. And with that, I think I'm just about done here. This has been the WPWWWU for the 7th of December, 2025. Remember Pearl Harbor always, and remember also the feeling of peace and security that accompanies me conveying you into the custody of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Tonight, we are probably going to spend the entire time discussing possibilities of alternate histories of the attack on Pearl Harbor. What would have happened, what could have happened, what might have happened, what should have happened, how people should have done things, would have done things, could have done things, and everything in between. So, without further ado, we're just going to jump right into this. Bro, if the carriers had been in there, it would have been an entirely different thing.
It would have been an entirely different thing, and just the first half of 1942 would have looked a lot different, because we would not have been able to oppose them in any meaningful way. So there's no Battle of Coral Sea, there's no Battle of Midway. The losses that we inflict on them never get inflicted. If we had lost our carrier strength on the day of the Pearl Harbor attack, we really can't oppose them in any meaningful way. until the start of 1943 at the earliest, when our Essex-class brand new carriers start getting launched and put into service. Because our existing, I mean, some of them got lost anyway, but we were still able to use them to inflict losses. You know, Saratoga, Lexington, Hornet are the ones that come to mind that we lost, but we took some of their carriers with us. And of course, the attritional losses that were inflicted on them were much more serious than the losses that were inflicted on us just because of our industrial capacity. I mean, look at what we can do. We can churn out 24 brand new Essex-class carriers in the last 3 years of the war, and they can churn out 0. All they can do is take some ships that they've begun building as battleships or cruisers and staple a freaking flight deck to the top of them and turn them into ad hoc aircraft carriers. So there's where the war really starts being won by us and lost by them, is when it gets into a battle of industrial production.
Right. Your observation of the oil capacity on Hawaii is astute. Had that been done, it also would have crippled our carriers. The only possible result would have been a fallback to San Diego if they could make it there. There's no guarantee there would have been enough floating crude to get them to San Diego. Maybe 1 or 2 if they sacrificed.
Yeah, perhaps not. And as a tactical matter, there is absolutely no good reason why they should have been targeting ships instead of fuel depots during that attack. And I have no explanation for why they didn't do it.
I think it was a tactical experiment. I think that the plan had been drawn up. The idea had been floated. And the more Tojo thought about it, the more convinced he was that it would not just be a crippling attack, that it would literally place Hawaii in a position to be taken by the Aleutian fleet. They'd just sailed south and sailed right into the freaking harbor under fire. And
we have to consider also the fact that there was still a real controversy of philosophies going on within the Japanese Admiralty, because you had your battleship admirals and your carrier admirals. You know, Yamamoto obviously was a carrier admiral. He said, let me go do this operation. I can show you how much ass I can kick with a carrier group. But there were still, people above him back at Admiralty headquarters who were only going to be impressed with this operation if he sank some battleships. And that probably played into it to some extent too, I would think.
Agreed. But taking out the crude oil right there, right then, would have neutralized the entire Pacific fleet. Anything west of San Diego would have been immediately grounded back to the continental mainland, would have left the Hawaiian Islands completely open for acquisition on some level, whether it was a blockade or they actually landed troops. Now, if they could have landed troops at Hawaii, it would have changed the entire direction and methodology of the war. The first attack would have taken place probably from San Diego and the western coast rather than Midway and all of that. It wouldn't have been a South Pacific fight. It would have been they would have gone for Hawaii first. I've no doubt.
Well, yeah, and as you just mentioned a moment ago, if they had done the prudent thing and attacked our tank farms and fuel depots, even falling back to San Diego, they might have had to get some canvas and raise sail in order to even get back to San Diego if their fuel supply had all been shot to shit. So yeah, it's the entire history of the first 2 years of the Pacific War would look decidedly, markedly different than it looks in our history books, and it starts even right on the 8th of December when they attacked the Philippines. They would have had, in the actual event, they took the Philippines without much trouble, but they would have had even less trouble if they had successfully neutralized one or more of our carriers in port at Pearl Harbor before they had undertaken that operation.
I've had someone argue with me that the reason they didn't go for the fuel at Pearl Harbor was because they didn't have the firepower to actually do it, which I think is trash, and B, they were wanting to maintain the fuel for their ships in the event that they took Hawaii. But I don't see a future without taking out the carriers or the fuel in which there is an attack on Hawaii that actually succeeds. not putting boots on the ground.
And I understand the prudence of the torpedo attacks against our battleships and cruisers and what have you, but the bombs they were dropping on those battleships, I mean, setting aside the bomb hit that broke Arizona's back, because that was basically the luckiest bomb hit in the history of aerial bombing. I mean, you could drop that bomb 10,000 times and it wouldn't hit as perfectly as it hit in order to go right straight to her magazine and break her back and make her jump out of the water and sink to where she still sits today with 1,200 of her men entombed inside, or whatever it is. But those bombs they were dropping on those battleships, they should have been dropping on the tank farms and the fuel depots, and they would have gone up like matchsticks. And that was the biggest advantage they could have gained from that operation and that attack, was to deprive us of our fuel rather than depriving us from a couple of pretty old, pretty obsolete World War I era dreadnought battleships that weren't, even if they had remained afloat and in service, they weren't going to play a very big part in the war as it unfolded, because as we know, it was a war that wound up being decided by fleet carriers and air power almost exclusively.
Almost. I would argue exclusively. It was the very first true air superiority war. There were a few before that were sketchy, but that was entirely the Pacific theater was almost entirely air superiority. The boots on the ground effect were necessary. Those had to occur because any movement against Japan or Okinawa before you clear the Philippines and the Marianas and all those would merely be starting a war on two fronts, which we might lose. That right. There's no
and even when you get to the Battle of Midway, which you're not even to the end of 1942 yet, already the battleship is so irrelevant that is the biggest, most decisive naval battle of the war, and the ships never even caught sight of each other. It was exclusively airplanes fighting against airplanes, and it's really kind of amazing when you study the naval war in the Pacific theater, just how few instances there are of surface ships firing their guns at each other. I mean, there are a few famous cases, obviously. I mean, Leyte Gulf and the Stand of Taffy 3, when our little destroyers and destroyer escorts decided to stand and fight against the mightiest part of the Japanese center fleet, Yamato and Nagato and all the cruisers and whatnot. And we actually made them give up and turn around, but that was really an isolated instance. And most of the surface vessels that wind up being sunk and heavily damaged are sunk and damaged by submarines and torpedoes, and not by naval gunfire, because naval gunfire has become that irrelevant that quickly, even though both sides went right on building battleships for some unfathomable reason.
I'll tell you why. Battleships are valuable for ground assaults on a port of any determined size. They are excellent artillery platforms that are mobile, and ground pounders love battleships. By the time you get to the end of the war, I mean, in the Pacific theater and the European theater alike, that is the main function to which big gun battleships and cruisers have been reduced to, is shore bombardment and supporting artillery forces during amphibious landings, like during D-Day is a good example. But there are so few and far between instances of especially battleships actually firing their guns at each other. And at the start of the war, like we said, you've got your battleship admirals and your carrier admirals, and the battleship admirals are all still fully convinced that the naval war is going to be decided by big gun battleships standing there slogging it out with each other. And how many battles in the entire war do you have, Pacific and European alike, where battleships actually fire at each other? I mean, the Channel Dash is one that comes to mind. All the ones that come to mind are Britain versus Germany, obviously. The Channel Dash and the Battle of North Cape, I guess. And there's only one or two more. It's really amazing how battleships went from being the cornerstone of naval strategy for every navy in the entire world to just being basically shore bombardment platforms that had been rendered completely irrelevant in terms of
firing at other surface vessels in engagements on the high seas. Like
They're
you
also
had,
effective at blockades. They're very effective at blockades. If you want to blockade an island, that couple of 3-4 battleships can do it because they can cover enough freaking range that anything would be insane to try to sail in there. But that being said, most of your contacts on the surface were either submarine destroyers or destroyer cruisers. I mean, submarine cruisers. There's not a lot of middle ground on it. The battleship was not obsolete, but it was obsolete for naval warfare in its classic sense. This is a perfect case of soldiers training to win the last war.
yeah, I was just about to say the exact same thing.
World War I would have taken full advantage of those battleships because the carriers were still toys.
Because all of the battleship admirals, when the Second World War started, they thought it was still going to look like the Battle of Jutland, basically, in the First World War, where the British Grand Fleet and the German fleet, just sailed alongside each other in a straight line and fired at each other with their big guns, and that was just the way you do naval combat. And then the airplane comes along, and they get those stupid airplanes away from me. I mean, they freaking court-martialed Billy Williams just for suggesting that airplanes might be able to sink battleships at some point in the near future, and he was drummed out of the service as a heretic just for even making such a suggestion. And how silly did those admirals look within 10 years?
Any chance we hired him? Because it seems he was on to something there.
Yeah, I always feel so bad for him. I mean, that's the kind of thanks you get from your country for being a visionary right there.
Well, I mean, like I said, they were training to fight the last war, and that's the pitfalls of having elders as your commanders, your admirals and whatnot. People who survived the last war are still suffering from the PTSD of that war, and they go over what went wrong every night in their heads, right?
Right.
And they damn sure we're not going to make those mistakes, but in so doing, they lock themselves into a thought process of winning the last war.
And it wasn't just in the Japanese Admiralty where you had that tension I was talking about between your battleship admirals and your carrier admirals. I mean, that same controversy was happening, in all of the navies and in all of the great powers as the 1930s wore on and turned into the 1940s. There, and it tended to be the battleship admirals who were slightly more entrenched in power and slightly more influential and slightly more long tenured and so, even after the battleship was completely irrelevant for terms of surface-to-surface combat, we still kept churning them out. And the Japanese still kept churning them out. The British kept churning them out. Germany stopped churning them out because they couldn't really churn them out anymore, but you know how that goes. Although
So-
they didn't... Go ahead.
I'm going to change gears a little bit here, and it kind of leads towards Germany. There's a book written, I believe, by Harry Harrison called The Misplaced Battleship. And in this book, a supervillain, quote unquote, a stainless steel rat, he plots to build a battleship, or she does. She plots to build a battleship, but there is no planetary base capable of building a battleship of this variety because they've been outlawed for 1,000 years in this galactic consort or whatever, right? My point is, would it be possible for a group of countries to put together a carrier fleet without it appearing to be a carrier fleet? Right? Say
Elaborate more for me.
Hypothetically, let's take, which I mean would never freaking happen, but a handful of southeastern countries with at least 3 deep ports decided to consolidate into a single carrier fleet. Could it be done in a way that would put a significant force on the doorstep of Japan or America or Russia without them realizing it had taken place? I mean, you can buy aircraft. You can buy everything that you need to build a carrier, but could it be accomplished without somebody cotton into the idea that, hey, for some weird reason, Mogadishu over here is building an American style carrier, or would we figure it out and do something about it?
Well, yeah, I guess the shipbuilding capacity would be a bigger obstacle than actually acquiring the materials, as it was for the Japanese, obviously, because so many of their ships that they used in the Second World War were actually built for them by the British back in the early and mid 30s when the two countries weren't at war with each other yet. And Britain used to build ships for a lot of their future enemies. British shipbuilders used to make a lot of money, fulfilling foreign orders like that. They didn't really care who they were building it for. They would build it for you if you wanted a thing built, whether it's I just lost my light.
Oh no, we're pouring one out for the homies. It was a good light. It served us well.
It was a good light. There it's back. Yay.
Yay. The technical issues are part of the show. So,
say a prayer for my side light, ladies and gentlemen.
Bless you, my child. All right, so let's change gears. Let's say the carriers make it, the fuel depot's gone. Carriers fall back to San Diego. There is enough floating oil to get them there, but we're regrouping from San Diego rather than Hawaii, right?
And then everything in the war is logistically twice as difficult as it is when you're operating out of Hawaii. Just because you're going 2,000 miles farther, I think is about how far it is from Oahu to San Diego. Let me look it up so I'm sure. I don't like to speak incorrectly.
I feel like it's 2,700 change. It's almost 3,000 miles. But
2,500.
Yeah, okay. Turn on the tide a little bit.
We were both wrong by the same amount.
Yeah, we're good. So Hawaii is pretty much tourniqueted. The only way to get help to Hawaii is basically through civilian shipping, and that civilian shipping will most likely have to rely on the local whatever fleet is still afloat around Hawaii for protection.
And you might have to just make a hard decision and write off Hawaii and let the bastards take it. It might come to that.
Well,
there might be no alternative.
The Aleutian fleet took the Aleutians, what was it, 8, I can't remember exactly, but
it was that operation was launched the very next day after Pearl Harbor on the 8th of December, right. The same day that the Philippine invasion was. So yeah, they were right on the ball, ready to go with their subsequent operations after they had inflicted the blow that they wanted to inflict, which wasn't as heavy a blow as they wanted to inflict, obviously.
Once you wipe the Aleutians, there's no need to man any of that. There's nothing there. You put a watchtower up and put 12 men on it or whatever, and a bunch of supplies, and you sail off to Hawaii and go plant your freaking flag over there, because
that's probably a big improvement in your circumstances. If you're the average Joe Japanese soldier, you go from garrisoning Attu Island to garrisoning Oahu.
Right, dude.
Get my vote. I don't think they like that. I don't think they like that Alaskan weather all that much.
I wouldn't either, man. You got a choice between Oahu and Attu. Come on, bro. Come on.
Oh yeah, and those guys that were in the garrison on Attu and Kiska Islands, they were there for the duration, man, all the way up until 1945, and they lived a pretty bleak existence for a lot of that time. Sir. If you read about their experiences, I mean, it got really, really rough. They might as well have been castaways, really, when it got to the end and it was impossible to resupply them. Yeah, it got pretty freaking bleak.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into that, because let's just say there's some missing folks that nobody ever explained where went. It wasn't asked. No one asked where they went. They're just gone.
They're just gone.
Okay, so the Aleutian fleet sails south. The Philippines goes with even less of a fight than they went. They've consolidated everything up to the Wallace Straits. By the time the U.S. has regrouped in San Diego and relaunched, we have what 3 Essex carriers afloat.
And then another question that comes up is if you're unable to hold Hawaii and you have to abandon it, where do you evacuate MacArthur to? Do you have to send him to Australia? I don't know. New Zealand? China?
Wow, no. New Zealand would be my guess. I don't think he would go to Australia given a choice. I think he'd choose an island because the U.S. is going to have to take him off the island eventually, and he wants to be at the head of a fleet when it goes. So an island with a deep water port.
And you know what one of the most fascinating things about MacArthur is that all the way from 1936 until 1951, when Truman relieved him of command in Korea, that 15-year period, he never sets foot one time on the American mainland. And I just think that's amazing.
Well, that's exactly the reason why I say New Zealand over Australia, because he would have chosen an island over a continent any day of the week. Because, like I said, they've got to take him off that island, and it's got a deep water port. It will be at the head of a fleet.
Yeah, I think New Zealand would probably be my guess too, if it got right down to it. But if they take out those fuel depots and those oil tanks, and possibly take a carrier or two, just think of all the downstream changes that think about that butterfly effect. Just
it's absurd.
Every single thing that we know about the history of the Pacific War is different, and sometimes remarkably, starkly different in ways that we can't even contemplate. I mean, it's such a big inflection point that it can't even be appreciated fully.
Let's ask this question. Okay, so the American fleet carriers and all goes down at Hawaii. 1 or 2 carrier groups get back to San Diego. This leaves the Australian Pacific Fleet, which is like a carrier and 3 battleships or some shit like that. I mean, it ain't much. It's like 36 ships or something.
I know that the flagship of the Royal Australian Navy was HMAS Sydney, which is a light cruiser. So they don't have any carriers, obviously. So they don't have, and I mean, not to cast aspersions on the quality of the Royal Australian Navy as a fighting force, but it has to be said that the flagship of their fleet was sunk by a German commerce raider in under a half hour. That's what happened to HMAS Sydney. I'm just saying.
My point is that leaves them as one of the strongest counter fleets in the Pacific theater, and they really don't got a whole lot to bring to bear on it. They might have been able to put up somewhat of a ruckus in the Philippines if they could be moved to do so, but I don't see it. I see them doing exactly what they did, pulling the fleet back to protect any Australian possessions in that area.
Yeah, and the Australians might have a better chance of putting up a fight with their submarines than with their surface fleet when you get right down to it.
I mean, yeah, they didn't have anything for that war in the Pacific at that time. I mean, I don't even know anything about their submarine program if they had one. I don't think they did at the time.
I will pull up that information presently.
Okay. So there is no other power in that field, in that theater, that could have brought anything to bear. China was already under the boot. All of freaking, I mean, the Philippines all the way over to Madagascar had all fallen under either German or Japanese control by that point in time. And most of your German influence over there was literally money. It was spy operations and clandestine black bag jobs.
Oh, wow, you were right. The Royal Australian Navy only had 1 submarine, and it was a secondhand Dutch boat. Wow.
Right.
So much for that theory.
Well, they didn't have a program, is what I'm saying. They bought the boat. They could retro.
They did acquire a few boats as the war went on, but during the time we're discussing, they didn't have anything except this secondhand Dutch boat that apparently they only used for training.
Right.
So yeah.
that specific boat created their submarine program. So like, I got no hate for them. They're just not in a position to do anything against the Japanese Navy, especially a completely undamaged and unharmed Japanese Navy after Pearl Harbor.
And I believe the Dutch fleet was operating out of Australia at this time, because obviously when the Dutch East Indies, present-day Indonesia, gets invaded, which also happens during this early 1942 period, they had to, obviously the Dutch fleet had to bug out and go somewhere else to avoid being captured. So the highest quality Navy that was operating out of Australia wasn't actually the Australian Navy, it was the Dutch Navy, as it turns out.
That makes sense. That's why I was thinking they had a few more ships than they did, but it wasn't Australians, it was Dutch. And
Right,
quite possibly a handful of other European ships that were in the region and retreated from what would have become a war front.
Yeah.
There really is no knowing what shipping and stuff would have been available for this type of operation.
And it was actually the Dutch who had more of their possessions captured by Japan than we did or the British did, because there's a hell of a lot of islands in Indonesia, man. And they captured the lion's share of them.
Absolutely. It changes so much. It's hard to pick a breaking point for the next point in the war. Midway never happens. The Marianas Turkey Shoot is
absolutely not.
Well, okay,
Yeah,
let me rephrase that. The Battle of Midway would have taken place 2 years later and would have looked totally different. I don't think it would have been a turkey shoot.
Yeah, there certainly would have been no similarly decisive battle in the summer of 1942. That's for damn sure.
Right.
Yeah, just not even a chance. And there's no Battle of Coral Sea either.
Also,
there really would. Go ahead.
We skip Iwo Jima entirely. We just leave it as an ensconced force on Iwo Jima. We don't even touch it. It would be untakeable at that point. It would have been occupied for 2 years instead of 8 months or whatever it was they had. Which, I mean, it was longer
which is similar to what we wound up doing in the event in a lot of those Dutch East Indies islands, which was just, we don't need to capture each one. If there's some strategically insignificant island that's got some little Japanese garrison on it, then and it can't be resupplied, then the hell with it. Just skip over it. Go to the next one that we actually want. And that's where you get those stories of, lone Japanese holdouts in 1970, 1973, 1974 who are still running around the jungle thinking the war is still going on.
So, all right. So what if, instead of trying to do an island hopping South Pacific campaign, a year, say 18 months after Pearl Harbor, America takes an Aleutian action? Hypothetically speaking, you could run a bombing campaign over the Aleutians if you could find the number stations necessary, and they black out. The only information the Japanese get from this is something's happened to them, right? But it would be this one, then that one, then this one, and it's like the Americans are coming. But
imagine what a Battle of Hawaii might have looked like if we had to abandon it, and then once our Essex class start being put into service, then we're in a position to go and try and take it back. That would have been one motherfucker of a battle, dude. So
we come in from the north rather than the south on Japan. We're not interested in Okinawa. We're looking at you. So the northernmost islands fall without a shot being fired. To my knowledge, they've never actually been fought over by anyone who doesn't live there. So
right. So maybe we take Hokkaido instead of taking Okinawa. That's an interesting thought. Right.
So we take Hokkaido. That gives us a really close deep water port, and we can land planes there. Suddenly this war is over by Christmas rather than taking an entire world to take. There's no cargo cults. None of that stuff ever happens. And the Japanese influence remains across all of Polynesia.
And who knows if it's even over before the Manhattan Project has been brought to a successful conclusion.
That's a good point, because if we could take Hokkaido from an Aleutian hop, which isn't impossible. It's just, if they see it coming, it becomes more unlikely. But keep in mind, most of their defensive fleet is out. All of that stuff's deployed out where it can be useful. They're not expecting an attack on the homeland. So we take Hokkaido, and we're within bombing strike of every single major city. The bat bombs get used, and the next thing you know, it's a burning inferno, and Tojo surrenders on exactly the same day.
Yeah, and we still would have built just as many B-29s, so our bombing capacity would have been unchanged. But yeah, it is fascinating to consider that how a more devastating Pearl Harbor attack and us having to abandon Hawaii might have actually resulted in a shorter war.
Okay, Fletch has a good question. Well, yeah, it might have resulted in, that's what I was pitching. It was shorter distance, shorter flights, shorter problems, right? Forget the Battle of Hawaii. Think about the Battle of LA or San Fran. I don't think there is a future where Japan can haul enough asses across the Pacific and land anywhere on the Western seaboard that they aren't immediately laid low by the locals. The locals, the military, the Coast Guard, all of them will show up and take effect, but locals will deal with that.
But he brings up an interesting point, and it's a point that goes back to the intelligence gathering successes that the Japanese had in terms of reconnoitering Pearl Harbor and figuring out what was there, when it was there, the layout of everything, and so forth. Because the fact that they were able to execute that attack as well as they did and have so much intelligence is a clear sign that there are a lot of Japanese nationals and Japanese Americans residing in the Hawaiian Islands who are working for Japanese intelligence, and that goes back to, if you're on the west coast of the American mainland, then we can't take any chances. We have to intern everybody, not just Japanese nationals, but Japanese Americans, anybody who's got an American name. We think of that as such a cruelly irrational act to have done, which it was, obviously, but it wasn't without a concrete foundation. It wasn't just an act of ethnic cleansing or racism. In other words, as much as people simplistically want it to be that, it wasn't that. It was decided that we had to take measures that extreme because of what had happened in Hawaii, because they were able to gather that much intelligence on our installations, and if they can do that in Hawaii, then they might be able to do that on the West Coast. And how can we take that chance? And that's how their thinking went. It wasn't just we hate Japanese people and we want to make them go live in shitty camps.
The shitty camps weren't absolutely horrible. And families are generally kept together. So, it wasn't the concentration camps that some would have you believe. In some cases, this was the first indoor kitchen and plumbing these people had had. So, it wasn't a German internment camp. It was an American internment camp. And these weren't prisoners per se. These were citizens in question. It was different. And I'm not trying to watch something. I'm saying it's different.
No, of course not. But the point is that these things are more complicated than we like to give them credit for when we're looking back on them from 80 years, and we just want to chalk up everything to evil racism when it wasn't that. Was there some element of that? Of course, sure there was. But let's not try to paint with too broad of a brush here, because it wasn't being done just for no reason. It was being done because experience told us that we probably needed to do something like this. And were there shitty things that resulted from it? Of course there were. And the shittiest thing was that the internees lost all of their property back home, and it was basically just allowed to be stolen by anybody who came across it. And it took them decades and decades and decades to get compensation for that. And that's the part that really sucks. And that should everybody's
right. So, wait, I think you glitched out, bro. Oh, yeah, there you're back. So, hypothetically speaking, the damage on Hawaii is a little bit more. Most of the fuel is taken out. The carriers recede back to San Francisco. Japan, the Aleutian fleet sails south, takes Hawaii. Hawaii is subjugated almost immediately with almost no fire, not a shot fired. Does the Philippines attack follow through, or does Hawaii become the layover point for attacking the American mainland?
I think the planning was so far along for the Philippines operation that it has to go forward when it went forward, frankly.
Right. It had already triggered, so...
Yeah, it was already scheduled for the 8th of December, so it would have been a difficult thing to pull it back in its entirety. And then another thing to consider is, would there have been an insurgent guerrilla war against the Japanese occupation of Hawaii?
That would be a great TV show, dude. Like Man in the High Tower, except in Hawaii. That'd be pimp.
Oh, yeah. Man, that's a hell of a good idea, dude.
That's also an alternate history where Hawaii fell and is still today under Japanese control. And there's still a French resistance style guerrilla war the last 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah, that could be really good. I'm a fan of The Man in the High Castle. I like that show.
Yeah. I watched a bunch of it, and I don't know, I stopped doing drugs. I didn't watch any more of it.
It kind of got more and more absurd as it went along, but I liked it in the beginning when it was more firmly grounded in, stuff that seemed actually plausible. But, when they, as the seasons wore on, they started, they were going to make the American lead character, the number one deputy of Heinrich Himmler, who was now the Fuhrer of Germany. And that started getting a little bit too out there for me. It still wasn't terrible, though.
I want to ask you a question. I don't want you to take it the wrong way.
Okay.
As far as Europe's concerned, who won World War II? Am I not looking at Fortress Europa sitting there?
Well, that's an interesting question. Sorry. I would put it to you, as I have put it to you before, that the ultimate aims of the Third Reich were achieved. But by nonviolent means, because what do we...
Am I glitching or him?
There we are.
Okay. I thought I froze up for a second there. I couldn't find anything wrong.
Yeah, I saw both of us disappear.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
Where were we? Oh yeah. Europe. Fortress Europa. Is it not standing exactly where it would have been?
It is standing exactly where it would have been, and the practical reality probably doesn't look all that much different.
Okay, just making sure.
In my estimation.
Yeah, just making sure I'm not completely off base with some of my interior monologue over here. Okay, so
no, sometimes I put that to people, and they look at me like I'm
Yeah, this is becoming a bit problematic. I bet it's his internet there. Give him a minute to reset back up. Yeah, no, it's the technical issues. They're all part of the show. Y'all know how this works, man. I'm assuming I'm still going and I haven't glitched out. I'm okay. Yes. Give me something in chat. Tell me you can hear me. Because if it's me, I don't want to screw what he's doing up, because it'd be like that sometimes. Yeah, Captain's froze. All right. I'm wondering what effects a Pacific loss, a loss of Hawaii has on the eastern, on the west, the eastern front. Is D-Day moved up? Does it happen sooner because we don't have a fleet to deploy to the Pacific? Do we send more troops to the European theater? I mean, they're available. Once we're in a war, we're in a war, and there's no two ways about that. And it's a world war, and so the Axis powers are the enemy, and so the enemy of mine enemy, ipso facto, we're at war with Germany. What does it change in relation to the European theater? I say not much. North Africa and Italy fall a little bit quicker. And when we do deploy to the Pacific, it is with an entirely battle-hardened soldiery than it is with us learning to island hop. The boys that go in there know how to take ground instead of having to learn it. I got you, bud. Thank you. It leaves, quite frankly, quite a bit of supplies available for the Eastern Front that were being directed to the Western to the Pacific theater. The European theater picks up 90,000 soldiers, 2 entire freaking operational groups. There could have been an entire front through Italy that just didn't happen because those people were in the Pacific. Welcome back, my brother.
Glad to be here. Thank you. Lost my internet.
What I was just asking was, what happens in the European theater? The lack of a Pacific front and a Pacific movement would mean that we suddenly have 500,000 soldiers that aren't going out in that direction. And so where do they go? Most of them end up going to Europe. We have an opening in North Africa and an opening in Italy that doesn't creep and crawl along, instead moves much like the fronts in Europe, the rest of Europe, France.
Well, does Hitler still inexplicably declare war on us on the 8th of December?
I say yes. I say that's already happened. He expected it to split our attentions, which it did to an extent, but we band-aided our split attentions with the British Navy, using the British soldiers and the Australian soldiers. We built a house of cards capable of taking Fortress Europa. But what I'm saying is, without the Pacific Fleet operating at the time it does, that leaves a really significant slug of trained military personnel capable of beaching in Italy, beaching in North Africa, beaching in the various places where we had a hard time of it, and it suddenly becomes not such a hard time. If you catch my drift, we're more well supplied than any of the German or Italian forces.
So then perhaps we could launch Operation Torch and then Operation Husky and then Operation Overlord more quickly than we did. In other words, is what you're getting at.
Right. Not only that, we would also have battle-hardened troops to field to the Pacific when our attentions do turn that way. We suddenly have experienced soldiers training island hoppers instead of having to learn how to island hop from, fucking French soldiers and shit.
That's one aspect of the end of the war that I've never quite understood, is that when the war ends in Europe and you still got May, June, July, August, you still got 4 or 5 months of war in the Pacific left, and there were a lot of guys who rather than being part of an occupation force in Europe wanted to go to the Pacific and do more fighting, and were battle hardened and had experience that they could impart to other people, and they wanted to go. I mean, Patton is the guy that comes most obviously to mind. He was desperate to go get at the freaking Japanese. He wanted a piece of those guys as bad as you can want a thing, but they said, nope, you're going to be military governor of Bavaria, George, and talk about a waste of a man's talents.
Right. There was a Native American fellow. I believe it was in World War II. He became the last Navajo war chief, if I remember properly. In order to become a war chief, you have to accomplish certain things. And these things are defined by pre-colonial marks of bravery. And so, one of the things you've got to do is take an enemy squad captive. He does this shit. There's a there's another thing where you have to steal an enemy horse. He does this shit. He went and stole a German horse, right? He does everything except for like count coup on an enemy commander. And there was this thing that went down, and back in like the late 50s, a German commander in exile had heard about this almost war chief that all he needed to do was count coup on an enemy. And so he flew to New York, got on a train, and went to like Indianapolis or whatever, went and met him in a park and got whopped upside the head a couple of times with a stick. And he became the last Navajo war chief not long before he died. But
counting coup is a strange custom.
Dude, think about it though. I mean, it's basically the slap with the glove, except at night with a stick.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept. Just the whole idea that the bravest, most honorable thing you can do is not to kill your enemy, but to touch your enemy and escape unscathed. And it's such an interesting thing.
Fletch is right. It was a Crow war chief, not Navajo. Navajo were the Crow talkers. And it's a common mistake made. I think the source that I read it from originally said Navajo. It was what was his name? I think it was Joe.
Yep.
You got a little
they made a great Nicolas Cage movie about the Code Talkers.
Well, yeah, it was a good one.
I know a lot of people really hate it. It's a guilty pleasure for me. I kind of have a soft spot for it.
Well, the battle scenes are absolutely fucking vicious, dude. That movie is hardcore. It's up there with Hacksaw Ridge, in my opinion. This man's internet gonna drive me to drinking if I don't start driving that hot rod. Lincoln. I don't know what to do about this. It's difficult to carry a conversation and to get anywhere in the whole thing, but we're gonna persevere. We're gonna facilitate. Yeah, Hacksaw Ridge is a great movie, and the dude who played what's his fuck? He did a magnificent, stupendous job. The whole concept of him not carrying a rifle into battle and grabbing an extra surgery pack instead, and then proving through action that it wasn't that he couldn't carry the rifle. He was strong enough. He was fast enough. He was good enough. He was everything the Army wanted, except without a rifle, which, according to the Army, made him useless. But in reality, Hacksaw Ridge proves heart really can carry the day, even if it doesn't carry the day in question.
Are we talking about Desmond Doss?
Yes, yeah. Sir. Desmond Doss, the one and only. We're waiting for him to pray, sir. Wait, you're delaying my attack for a man to pray? Yes, sir.
Yep.
And when he's done, we'll go. All right,
First conscientious objector to win the Medal of Honor.
And deservedly. Oh
yeah. I mean, it's you do not need to wield a weapon in order to be a brave soldier. He proved that.
Go read anybody out there who's seen Hacksaw Ridge and thinks that it's a bit much and that they went a little hard in the paint with it. Go read the after action accounts of those fucking battles. They did not go hard in the paint. There's stuff that happened in that day that are not in the movie because they knew you wouldn't believe it.
And Mel Gibson was the exact right director for that movie, because it's all the stuff that's in there is actual stuff, and he tells it really unflinchingly. And I think as a director, that is right in that dude's wheelhouse, and that was a perfect assignment to give him.
That whole faith in God thing, dude, is it seems insane, right? It's zealotry. Yeah. It is. But when you see a man stand up and walk across a battlefield that is marked death for anyone else in that uniform, and he just wanders around it like, he lost his keys and looking for him, patting everybody down and checking on him, and everyone around him is being turned to hamburger meat, but he is untouched. That shit could shake a man's faith, bro. Like, for real.
And the position I've always taken on things like that is that if you firmly, truly believe that your faith gives you extra courage and extra resolve and extra bravery and extra whatever, then it does. And it doesn't really matter as a practical thing whether your God is really true or your religion is the true religion, because if you think it gives you that, then it does. And more power to you.
And if you survived the battle, then maybe it did, and no one can ever prove it didn't. You know, you know the rumor that British officers never duck. They don't flinch. Bombs dropping around them and stuff. They're lighting their pipe and talking about, you know, tomorrow's eggs Benedict for breakfast.
Yeah, it's a fun story.
Term unflappable, right? Well, I mean, to a certain extent, it's true, but it's not that they don't duck. Of course they do when it's necessary to do so. It's just that they don't do it unnecessarily. If you see them ducking, you should have already ducked. You're late to the show,
well, I mean,
bro.
As we know, every stereotype originates from a kernel of truth. And so that's just another one of those things. The British stiff upper lip, though it might be sort of overstated once in a while, it obviously is a real thing, or that stereotype wouldn't exist. It's just part of their national character to be unflappable and to always understate everything, no matter how dire the situation you are in is. So, you know, if you're in a building that's getting bombed to shit and it's falling down around you, then you get on the radio and you say, "Yes, we're having a spot of trouble here." That's British stiff upper lip right there.
Cheerio, old chap. Any chance we could have some of those bombers come through in the next 15 minutes?
Exactly.
It seems like a bit of a broken arrow situation over here. It's quite sporting.
I say, old man, we seem to be in a spot of bother here.
A spot of fucking bother. That's my favorite British anachronism, bro. It's great. I love it. Because when a Brit tells you they're in a spot of bother, you should expect a lot of freaking bother. It's serious.
Yeah. That's the British equivalent of an American saying, "We are completely foobar."
Yeah. It's gone foobar, sir. Send the Marines.
Uh-huh.
All right, so okay, let's flop over to the Eastern Theater for a second, because there's one event there that I've always wanted to speak deeper about, and I've never really had a chance. When the army, I think it was Army Rangers, were surrounded by the Germans. Can't remember the name of the town, but I don't think it was Bastogne. I think it was the one just past it. They were completely subject. There's like 24 mix of paratroopers and Army Rangers in there, and they get surrounded by the Germans. The Americans know the front is supposed to be here, right? This is where the front is on the maps. This is where the front is according to the radio. But there are no Americans outside. They're all damn Germans. We keep having to shoot them because we keep trying to get in. And then the people inside are having this argument because the captain at the time had a bit of a concussion and was kind of operating on like programming, right? And all he kept saying is, you know, this is where the front's at. Look, listen to the radio. The front's right here. Well, the aerial front was right there, but the actual battle was taking place 5 miles down the road at a different town. Congratulations, you're surrounded. When the captain there realizes he's surrounded, he somehow he gets some kind of contact from the Germans. The Germans send in somebody to talk a surrender, to bring these people in and have them, you know, legitimately housed in a legitimate POW camp and not sent to the ovens. He sends in, we will disarm you, we will feed you, we'll clothe you, we will put you on a train and send you to the nearest POW camp. You'll be ensconced over here until the end of the war where you can do no damage. And the response these gentlemen gave was a single word: nuts. We have you surrounded with 3
General Terry McCall, if it was Bastogne.
Yeah. Nuts. It was Bastogne? Okay. Homeboy I'm just curious. Do you reckon he has a bag to carry his balls in, or does he just walk them around with a fucking wheelbarrow? Because, I mean, the Germans could have rolled right through the middle of that town with those tanks if they'd wanted to, but they wanted the town, and you can't have a town that you destroy. Are we frozen again? I think we're frozen again. Oh, we got movement. Cool. Anyway, Pacific Theater.
Am I still here and he's gone? Can the people in the chat hear me right now?
Right now we can hear you, but right now you're gone. All right. Keep it together. Fellas, look, y'all, look. We got to keep it together. Lorenzo, get on that. Fix it immediately. Jesus Christ. Hard to hire good help nowadays. Wrong button. Oh, look. It's my email. Why is it still there? There we go. All right. So, all right, let's say, well, no, I mean, if Hawaii stands, if Hawaii stands, there's no change. I don't see any difference. I guess there could have been an attempt. You got to hit the button again, because I hit the button, then you hit the button, then I hit the button, then you hit the button, and all the buttons got hit.
I think we're good, aren't we?
For the moment, yes, sir. So what does Battle of Midway look like when we finally get around to it 2 years later? Is there a Battle of Midway, or do we just bypass it? We use our
there's going to be a battle that's similar to Midway, but it is going to be much more of a bloodbath for them and not for us, because then we would have been fighting that battle with all brand new Essex class aircraft carriers, and we probably would have had 7 or 8 of them instead of the 3 or 4 rather obsolete ones that we used at Midway. And yeah, that would not have gone well for our Japanese friends. Not at all.
We had Mustangs against Zeros at that point. That would have been absolute bloodbath, bro. That would have been that would have been bad.
Oh yeah. P-38s, Corsairs, all of the fighters that we had in the second half of the war that we didn't have in the first half, instead of the P-40s that we mostly used at mid. Oh yeah, that would have been
ugly.
That would have been a turkey shoot, dude. Yeah,
adding the Mustangs, adding the P-38s, and that changes that Pacific march quite a bit. Because suddenly we don't have to take nearly as many physical islands as we had to, given the way we were moving. We could take half of them. Because,
right, and it's another thing that plays into your theory that if Pearl Harbor had been more successful and more devastating for us, it might have actually led to the war being shorter. And I can really see that picture more and more clearly the more we talk about it. And it's not a bad theory, in my opinion.
Germany's beaten by what, 43, 44? It moves up D-Day. All the full force of the American might goes east. Battle-hardened troops come in, jumping from the south. Or I still like the Aleutian Corridor myself. It's a much shorter route, and there's nobody there.
Yeah, and you might not have any Battle of the Bulge.
That never happens, or at least happens in fucking Italy or something rather than where it happened. It would have been different, something like that.
So yeah. I mean, if you move up Operation Torch, then North Africa gets dealt with sooner. If you move up Operation Husky, Sicily and Italy get dealt with sooner, and then that leads to moving up Operation Overlord, and yeah, you might be able to wrap up the entire thing by the end of 44, just the way it was supposed to be wrapped up when they launched Operation Overlord. Everybody was completely convinced we were all going to be home by Christmas, and of course, it in the actual event it took until May of 45. But war is like that sometimes, and that's primarily because the Battle of the Bulge happened.
Market Garden has a fighting chance of succeeding. And that could be a huge, because with the additional troops and supplies and everything that's not going to the Pacific Theater, suddenly Market Garden actually has a small chance, even with the flooded fields and whatnot, because it's just more of everything. I'm not sure it would have mattered because I mean those flooded freaking fields out there really screwed the pooch.
But yeah, if you change Market Garden from a setback to a success, then obviously that's going to grease the skids for the whole thing and bring us closer to a final resolution before the calendar flips to 1945. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, definitely, but we're if Market Garden is even, if it's not just the failure that it was, because I mean, there were some technical successes there, but it just wasn't. It wasn't what it could have been. If it was what it could have, we're in the Rhineland by the end of 43. It was an extremely audacious operation.
If I'm not mistaken, it was the biggest attempted airborne invasion in world history, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the reason it was even green-lighted in the first place was because of the absolutely absurdly effective nature of the airborne on D-Day. Those boys were absolutely devastating to the backfield of the German. They had the Germans behind the Fortress Europa, behind the coast, had no freaking clue what the hell was going on, because according to their reports, the Americans had attacked everywhere simultaneously. Most of the people on the ground had no idea there had been an aerial drop. They thought the bombs were the point, right? So when they saw the airplanes go over, it never crossed their mind that there were Americans raining from the sky. And the first thing you would know about it would be a bullet through your head. So it worked exceptionally well. The problem with Market Garden was there was a little bit more reliance on gliders and a little bit more reliance on drop weight, just material, and the material did not land in the proper locations. The men did not land in the proper locations.
and oftentimes the supply drops were the completely wrong supplies, as they depicted in the movie A Bridge Too Far, one of the very best World War II movies ever made, and a really ballsy thing of Dickie Attenborough to do, to make a movie of that size and scope about a failed British operation. But thank God he did, because look at the picture we got out of it. But as he depicted in that movie, oftentimes the guys are desperate to be airdropped, food, medical supplies, weapons, ammunition, and they get hats. And that was a real thing that happened.
Right. And Fletch says Wake Island was also the only successful defense against an invasion attempt.
Yeah, he raised two good points about Wake Island. Also, that it was the first U.S. and / Allied victory of the Pacific Theater.
Yeah, it changes a lot.
It does.
It does.
And we Americans do play those psychological games, and we're not bad at them.
Right. I don't know. I don't see any future, like I said before, where there's a direct attack against the American mainland. What I see happening is Hawaii falls, occupied by China, by Japan. Like you said, an insurgent action in the Hawaiian Islands for the next freaking however long we're willing to fund it, because the CIA will be along in a minute.
And they made a couple of kind of ridiculously absurd attempts of attacking the American mainland. One was a kind of improvised bioweapon, and the other was flaming balloons trying to start forest fires in the Pacific Northwest. And that probably doesn't change a whole hell of a lot, even if they have possession of Hawaii, because you're still 2,500 miles away from the mainland, so you might not have any better option than stupid, trifling, doomed to fail efforts like the ones that they actually launched.
Well, no, because like I said, once you, if the Aleutian fleet gets access to Hawaii, that changes the jumping off point to the mainland completely. And while it's not a huge difference as far as distance, it is a massive difference as far as like resistance is concerned. There's nothing out there. They can just sail to San Francisco. You know what I mean? Like there is nothing to stop them. The worst thing you got to worry about is an angry drug dealer. That's it.
Maybe during the Battle of Los Angeles, we would have been shooting at an actual enemy instead of an imaginary enemy that we just thought was. We sure did expend a lot of rounds of ammunition shooting at that imaginary enemy, though. That was a hell of a fun night.
I bet it was. Oh, I bet it was.
I mean, there was enough munitions expended that they actually call it the Battle of Los Angeles, and that's the most impressive thing for me.
I actually have a theory on that one.
I bet you do.
They witnessed one of those balloons that was coming down, and the fact that it was seen from so many directions by so many people, folks shot at it, and not knowing it's a balloon, they shot the balloon, and so it drops over here with nobody ever being the wiser. Sitting out there somewhere in South LA, there's a fucking a firebomb just hanging out in some dude's backyard.
And everybody was on such a hair trigger that if you see something in the sky that you don't immediately recognize, then it must be the Japs and we have to shoot at it. And, that was the way every single person and every single, shore battery and everybody reacted, and just bam, 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 bam. Get that bastard whether he exists or not.
Well, I mean, better safe than sorry, I suppose. I don't. Well, know.
I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. I guess they got some good gunnery practice out of it.
I mean, if there had been a Japanese airplane involved, then it would have been fucked. That's what I'm talking about. Actually, the Battle of Los Angeles shows you exactly what I mean when I say that these locals take care of the problem if there's an actual attack on the fucking mainland. I don't think it makes it any further than literally LA and San Diego. That's it. San Francisco takes a little hit. LA takes a little hit, and like, there's no way they launch a D-Day style invasion of the mainland. I don't think that's.
Well, and if they had managed to gain possession of Hawaii, I think the biggest difference that would make would be the ability of their submarines to loiter off the mainland, and they probably could have caused some actual significant damage that way. Not enough to win the war, but they could have at least hit something here and there.
Keep in mind, our trade concepts at the time were quite isolationist. Most of our manufacturing and whatnot were being made and purchased at home. Exports wasn't exactly a huge thing on the agenda during the war years. We were mostly importing. But even if you blockade California with submarines, it still comes in through both Canada and Mexico. It has no measurable effect on the availability of goods. It just changes which way they come from.
Yeah, I don't think they would have tried to institute a full-on blockade. I think it would have just been submarines loitering off the coast, by themselves, just shooting at targets of opportunity.
Sure, but that does have a chilling effect on commerce in the area, almost by immediate effect. But if that's not happening in Canada and that's not happening in Mexico, it, like I said, it makes things a little bit more expensive because they have to come through different tariff entries. But other than that, there's no measurable access change. There would be a hiccup in supply, and then it would be mitigated. Plus, the East Coast,
it would have quite a psychological effect, I think, and then probably more of a psychological effect than a practical effect.
Galveston becomes a military base as opposed to an oil center, because
perhaps so.
Given our capability of trucking material and men at the time, that would be one of the nearest deep water harbors where we could offload men, and was used at the time for military actions. I believe it becomes a much more significant location, and the whole highway system reflects it in the future.
And that's the nearest place on our mainland to the Panama Canal, so that speaks for itself.
Exactly. That's another reason. Is that's one of the shortest distance between an eastern deep water port and a western deep water port, which means once the eastern theater closes, once the European theater is closed and they start pulling hardened troops out, they're not just being sailed around the Horn, right? They're not all going through the Panama Canal over here. some of them are sailing in here and getting on brand new ships on the West Coast and sailing out there. And that's when it becomes a fucking issue for Japan. That's when suddenly, like, it's not just the Atlantic Fleet coming, right? You know, the Atlantic Fleet's coming. You know, the Aleutians are going down. You know, they're probably going to resubjugate Hawaii here soon. Do you prepare for that and try to deal with the repercussions? I mean, you see it coming. It's not even, you can't hide that.
It's too bad Yamamoto never got to write his post-war memoirs, because it would be nice to have his answers to a lot of these questions. But of course, I don't object to the fact that we blew his ass out of the sky, because, you know, turnabout is fair play.
It kind of is, but still, it begs the question. Like I said, I mean, it's possible that the extra men and manpower in the European theater closes out the European theater earlier and more succinctly. And also, if that's true, then Operation Paperclip might have gone down quite differently.
Perhaps.
I mean, we could have ended up with some like serious manufacturing and, you know, pretty much what the Russians picked up.
Yeah, and maybe you don't have a partition of Germany for 45 years. There's all kinds of possibilities.
I don't know about that, dude. I don't know that I see that being an option. I don't think Russia pulls out of that of war footing, because I mean, you got to remember, it took them a little while.
But if the thing ends 6 months earlier, they don't have as much of a chance to consolidate German territory as they did in the event. So maybe they pick up less German territory, and the partition line isn't where it wound up being. Who knows?
No, it still no. I don't. I think that would be an immediate concession made by the Joint Chiefs, because that line kind of needed to be where it was, because that splits Berlin. And that was what needed to happen, in their opinion, was at least a breakup of German power in the region by cutting off communications from one side to the other. If we're not going to take it outright and the Russians can't have it, then it has to go through Berlin, regardless of what territory they took. And I think that is the more intelligent concession, as opposed to trying to put that through, what would it be? I don't even know where it would be. Where would you put the line otherwise? And you leave an intact Berlin and an intact German system. Nope. That doesn't work. You got to cut Berlin in half on that point, I think.
Well, yeah, but Berlin lies hundreds of miles inside what wound up being East Germany. So, and, you know, maybe you do have to cut it in half. Who knows? If they cut it in fourths, technically, if we're being sticklers about the thing. But do you want me to do the thing?
Yeah, oh my God, I'm sorry, dude. Do the thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius tonight. I thought we had a very high-minded, very thought-provoking discussion, and it was a good day to have it, this being the 7th of December, Pearl Harbor Day, which we should always keep in mind to remember now that all the survivors are gone. So let's honor them by talking about these events every 7th of December, and let's pass that on to future generations. And like I said, let's never let it pass out of the public consciousness and popular memory and all that good stuff. We hope you have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow and an edifying rest of your week. We will see you back here next Sunday night, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, for our usual normal shenanigans that we like to do so much. So take care. See you next time. Get off my lawn.